Welcome aboard Rocket Ship, the platform with the most relevant content for competitive examinations. This is Rocket Ship IAS Lab and continuing with our series on answer writing for General Studies papers of Civil Services main examination. We take up a question that you might expect in GS paper 3. Here goes the question. What do you understand by species specific conservation? Analyze its effectiveness with citing examples from India. Now, on the face of it, it would appear that this question requires some, you could say, particular knowledge, particular subject knowledge. But if you were to go by its very nomenclature, that is the terminology that the question uses, species specific conservation, you can actually make out what this terminology would mean. It would mean that in these type of conservation efforts, the focus is on particular species. That is why they are called species specific conservation. Now coming to the second part of the question, where you are supposed to analyze the effectiveness of species specific conservation, giving examples from India. Be careful that the question does not require you to critically analyze the effectiveness. That is, you are not supposed to criticize it. Actually, there is no criticism that can be directed at a species specific conservation. However, what you should do, that you should talk about the shortcomings of species specific conservation. That is, what more could be done apart from focusing on particular particular species. What more could be done? That should be the number of your argument. Now we are introducing an answer with making a very, you could say, poignant observation, basically, that should make you think. That is, for a number of anthropogenic causes like habitat loss and degradation, overhunting, and increasingly climate change, many species of flora and fauna are endangered. Flora, you certainly means the plants, basically those who flower, and fauna, as you know, are the animals, including the fawn. Anyway, the point is, what was poignant here, that it is mostly due to human actions, that is anthropogenic causes, that the species of flora and fauna are endangered. Basically, it is we humans who are to blame for endangering the entire, you could say, biosphere. Almost every species of flora and fauna are endangered due to human actions. Now coming to IUCN Red List, you are certainly aware this is actually published by International Union for Conservation of Nature. IUCN Red List has listed 950 animal species and over 600 plant species from India as vulnerable, endangered, and critically endangered. Basically, these are groups of animals that are in various stages of endangerment. MOEFCC, that is Ministry of Environment, Forests and Climate Change, lists 73 species as critically endangered. You have to highlight this point, that MOEFCC lists 73 species as critically endangered in India, meaning they face extinction risk in the near future. That is, they face imminent extinction risk. This brings out the urgency that conservation programs must display. Now this was just a filler to, you could say, fill the space. Anyway, of the many approaches to wildlife conservation is species specific conservation, which, as you can make out through its very name, it means focus on particular species that faces immediate extinction risk or is in various stages of endangerment. This is different from the general approach, which focuses on protecting habitats by declaring national park, sanctuary, etc. You can understand very, well that the general approach is to declare a particular, you could say, habitat itself as a, you could say, reserved forest, sanctuary, national park, etc., so that the entire biological community in that particular protected area would be conserved. But a species-specific conservation is slightly different, where the focus is on particular species. A species-specific conservation has many advantages and some shortcomings as well, as is generally expected that something would have many advantages apart from a few shortcomings. Now coming to a species-specific conservation, what are its advantages and shortcomings? Taking the advantages first, it means it would focus on most at risk species. It means that species which actually face immediate danger of extinction, we can actually focus on them and try to conserve them, try to, you could say, snatch them from the jaws of extinction. Urgent intervention, it generally yields quicker result because it means urgent intervention, a fast intervention in conserving the particular species, and it generally yields quick result. It also means protecting the habitat particular to that species. As we are trying to conserve this particular species, it often means that we would protect its natural habitat as well. However, conservationists have also argued that a species-specific conservation should only be a stopgap. The focus should be rather on conserving the entire biological community. This is a very, very important concept, the concept of biological community. Actually, what happens in the biosphere, no species, including humans, is isolated from other species. Generally, all species, without exception, all species live in a community which is called biological community. They are interconnections, they are actually ecological interconnections in which only a particular species would survive. So this is called biological community, and the conservationists have argued that rather than on focus on a species specific conservation, the focus should be on the entire biological community. Detailing these points, through a species specific conservation program, the focus is on a species most at risk, which actually and generally which need immediate intervention. This means interventions tailored to particular requirements of the species. We would see it through an example. For an example, it needs focus on grasslands to protect the great Indian bustard. Please recall that till now the focus in the conservation programs is on preserving the forests. Mostly it has been on preserving the forests, but in the specific case of great Indian bustard, it is the grassland and in fact the desert and this arid landscape that has to be conserved to conserve the great Indian bustard. So a species specific conservation would mean that we can actually focus on the particular needs of a particular species. A species specific conservation comes with a sense of urgency and yields quick verifiable results. Again, no one is going to argue against this point that due to its focus, it means it can yield quick and verifiable results. A species specific conservation also has the effect of preserving the particular ecosystem of the species so that it thrives well unassisted in future. So while in the immediate, you could say, term, we have to actually conserve the species, but if we can actually protect its natural habitat, its natural ecosystem, it would mean that it would thrive naturally in the future. The species would thrive naturally in the future. One of the most celebrated example of this approach, a species specific conservation which focuses on preserving the particular ecosystem, is preserving the riverine ecosystem. That is, the focus has been preserving the riverine ecosystem for conserving the Gangetic dolphin, and as we would see later, the gharial as well. Gharial is a crocodilian species from India. Anyway, the point is endemic to India. Gharial is endemic to India. So the thing is, a species specific conservation can also preserve the particular ecosystem in which the animal would thrive in future. However, the shortcoming being, the conservationists have argued that rather than only a few species. The goal should be preserving the interconnectedness in the habitat, in the ecosystem, the very biological community. To give you just one example of biological community, what actually has been observed, that wherever, we would repeat it and please pay attention actually, wherever the population of riverine turtles, wherever there is a healthy population of riverine turtles, generally the gharial has thrived well. Actually, it has been observed that the turtle actually makes the ecosystem favorable for the gharial. To give you just one example, turtles have a role in forming sandbanks on the, you could say, river banks, and these sandbanks are the actual areas where the gharial also lays egg. So basically turtles have the role of keeping the ecosystem healthy for other species including the gharial. So the focus should be on preserving the entire biological community rather than on particular species, where the targeted species can thrive naturally because it is a part of the community. So if we can focus on the biological community, every species in that particular community is likely to thrive as well. Now coming to the notable successes of species specific conservation in India, which they are successful examples from both in situ and ex situ. We are taking it for granted that almost everyone here would be aware of these terms, but to explain briefly, in situ means in their natural habitat, in nature itself, and ex situ means sometimes they have to be separate places. For an example, at a breeding center, separate places including breeding centers, zoological parks, botanical gardens, etc. So this is a basic difference between in situ and ex situ preservation. However, the two, you could say, examples, the two types are interconnected. The examples of Project Tiger, Project Elephant, Project Rhino are well known. Other examples worth mentioning are the case of Hangul, which is the Kashmir stag. What actually happened, they were once really endangered. Their numbers had actually fallen to quite precipitously to very low, you could say, units. But the Dachigam National Park was established mostly with the goal of preserving the Hangul, and now the Hangul is actually thriving. And nowadays, actually, some people have observed the Hangul outside its restricted range. It has been observed outside the Dachigam National Park. So most conservationists can say this with some, you could say, confidence that the Hangul is indeed thriving. Mahua Dand Wolf Sanctuary, which is in Jharkhand, to conserve the endangered Indian grey wolf. It is actually India's first wolf sanctuary. Black buck, it's a celebrated example of conservation efforts in India. Some of the black buck specific conservation efforts are Black Buck National Park, which is in Vilvadar in Gujarat, and Rani Bennur. It is Rani Bennur Black Buck Sanctuary, which is in our Karnataka state. There is another example of ex-situ actually, which is Kukrel Gharial Rehabilitation Center. It is Kukrel Gharial Rehabilitation Center, which is in Lucknow. To captive breed, it's a breeding center for the gharial, which is an example of ex-situ project, as we have talked about that the breeding centers, the zoological park, the botanical gardens come under ex-situ conservation efforts. Then comes Project Vulture, which has a mix of ex-situ and in-situ with important breeding centers at Pinjore in Haryana and Rajbhatkawa in Bengal, etc. These are most of them actually breeding centers, so they are examples of ex-situ conservation efforts for the Indian vulture. However, there are in-situ programs for the vulture as well. But in the case of vulture, we are not yet confident if we have been able to stanch their decline. So we would need more evidence to say that the conservation program, the species-specific conservation program, has been successful in the case of vulture. Anyway, to recap, the specific the species specific conservation program has the advantages of focusing on particular species, making urgent intervention, moreover preserving the particular habitat, the particular ecosystem of a species so that it would thrive in the future as well. However, conservationists argue that the species specific conservation program is mostly a stopgap and the focus should be conserving the entire biological community so that everyone within that biological community would thrive, including the particular species. So this was all on species specific conservation. We would reassemble for the next lecture in a few days. As usual, we wish you all the best. Thank you.